My friends, we stand here today to remember and honor the Wildstorm universe, a DC Comics imprint which prints no more. Whether we were marveling at Jim Lee's pencils on Wildcats when it first launched from Image, or rushing to buy one of the multitude of variant covers from Gen 13's first ongoing series, there's no doubt that Wildstorm was a powerhouse in the comics industry. From Alan Moore to Mark Miller, from Whilce Portacio to Humberto Ramos, from The Authority to Danger Girl. Some of the best creators created some of the best comic books while calling Wildstorm home. Then DC bought it in and ran it into the ground. But friends, let us remember Wildstorm is going out with a bang, not a whimper, as on today's show we review DV8, Gods and Monsters, an 8-issue miniseries drawn by Rebecca Isaacs and written by Brian Wood. Oh, and Astro City was always good, always. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Comic Book Issues. I'm your host, the Last Angry Geek. Yes, it's true. After numerous inconsequential reboots and dipping sales, DC has decided to cancel their Wildstorm imprint. Sure, the most recent reboot, setting all of the ongoings in an apocalypse setting, was so bad that it made number 6 on my recent top 11 comic book misfires list, but still, I take no joy in Wildstorm's fate. At one time, Wildstorm had some of the best creators creating some of the most exciting comic books. Something that slowly got lost after DC bought them out. But since Jim Lee, Wildstorm's creator, is now the co-publisher of DC Comics, I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we see these characters again. But whether it's the Gen 13 kids joining the Teen Titans, or even Apollo and Midnight are replacing Superman and Batman on the JLA, it just won't have the same feel as the glory days, will it? But at least one set of characters got one more chance to shine before the announcement that Wildstorm was folding. Meet the dysfunctional kids from DV8.
Originally a spin-off of Gen 13, the kids of DV8 are the genetically altered progeny of super soldiers used as pawns by the government agency that created them. The kids had their own book, originally written by Warren Ellis and drawn by Humberto Ramos. What made them unique was that ultimately they didn't really like each other or what they did all that much. Over 30 issues, members died, were replaced, and the team eventually split and scattered to the four winds of fandom. Having been unpublished for almost a decade, DV8 seemed lost to the 25-cent bins of time. That is, until they were resurrected by Brian Wood, the man behind such Vertigo titles as DMZ and Northlanders.
Now, apparently it took some convincing on Brian's part, as he pitched DV8 to the Uberlords at DC several times before finally getting the go-ahead with this series. His idea was to make things simple. Brian decided to do away with almost all of the continuity and start from scratch, while still honoring the basic themes of DV8.
The series starts with Jem Antonelli, aka Copycat, being held inside an interrogation chamber and asked by an anonymous voice to recount her recent ordeal. She's aboard the Carrier, the spaceship headquarters of the Authority, as it's racing away from an exploding planet. Jem, whose main power is mind control, flashes back to falling out of the sky and landing in the middle of a battle between primitive tribes. She's rescued by fellow deviant Leon Carver, aka Frostbite, who has the power to add or remove heat from anything. As we see that there are two suns in the sky, we realize that she must have arrived on the exploding planet we've seen in the present. After the battle, Leon explains how the deviants arrived, just as Jem did, but days earlier. After their usual bickering, Michael Heller, aka Evo, who has the power to turn into a wolf, hears something and chases after it, never returning. Then Rachel Goldman, the girl called Sublime, who can change her body from diamond hard to intangible, also wanders away. Former team leader, telekinetic, and general psychopath Matthew Callahan, aka Threshold, sees their first signs of human life and promptly kills them before disappearing the next morning. Hector Morales, aka Powerhouse, who can transform other people's emotions into mass, also leaves, soon followed by Nikki Callahan, aka Bliss, who can inflict pleasure or pain with her touch. Eventually, this just leaves Leon and Jocelyn Davis, aka Freestyle, a gymnast with enhanced reasoning powers, as the only two left. They eventually get captured by one of the tribes on this world, but when it's revealed that they have powers, the natives adopt them as gods, as indeed the other tribes have already adopted the other deviants. The only problem is, much like DV8, the tribes on this planet don't really like each other very much and are at war, and they expect their new gods to protect them and lead them against the other deviants. The following issues show how, for better or worse, the other deviants joined their tribes and began to influence and be influenced by them. Issue 2 picks up with Bliss leading a female cult into confrontation with Frostbite's tribe. In flashback, we see that she's captured by this female cult and kills one of her captors, but is later given the opportunity to save a life with her power. It's the second act, saving a mother and her newborn, that earn her the title Goddess and some worship.
I'm going to need a minute. And I mean a minute.
Anywho, when Jem points out that Bliss's tribe wants a human sacrifice from Frostbite's people, Bliss gives the series its name when she points out that here they can either be gods or monsters, and she's made her choice. In issue 3, Frostbite and Copycat seek out Powerhouse in the hopes of using his emotion absorption powers to counteract Bliss, only to find he's living in one tripped-out scene, Daddy-O. Jem learns that drugs are actually meant to block his emotion absorption because the terrible emotions like hate, anger, and grief all leave trace amounts behind that he can never rid himself of. We see that when Hector was captured, he was branded and used his pain to supergrow, but in the process kills a man. Hector refuses to join them against Bliss, and the man he killed's widow, who is taking care of Hector now, tells Jem that their arrival has signaled the end of the world. Hector lays it out that their arrival will do the natives no good, and just because they're from a more advanced society doesn't mean they're better than these natives. The best thing the deviants can do is live like him and try to have as little impact on this world as possible. From there we go to issue 4, and Threshold, who is the complete opposite of Powerhouse's philosophy. As both Bliss and Threshold have been test subjects since childhood, they are the most screwed up mentally of all the deviants. Matthew is quickly beaten down by his tribe and uses his power to kill his attacker, but the act leaves him weak. This tribe expects him to fight, but he continually loses. Jem explains that Threshold is a masochist, used to being feared and hated, but this tribe would give him neither. Desperate for their fear, Matthew continues to fight, gradually earning their respect, and coming to feel needed and appreciated for the first time in his life. He embraces his godhood and begins to lead the combat tribe to war against the other natives, ambushing Freestyle and her tribesmen. Issue 5 is split between Sublime and Evo.
It's an 8-person team in an 8-issue series. They have to start moving things along.
Rachel finds herself captured by the tribe that took in Evo, but whereas her powers and stuck-up attitude make her a god, his powers make him a sideshow act. Sublime's holier-than-thou attitude means she has no problem looking down on Evo, who's forced to fight in dog rinks and shovel,
What's the word I'm thinking of here? Oh, that's the one.
When Sublime decides to lead her tribe into war, Evo has had enough. He challenges her to a duel in order to get her to stop her part in the upcoming battle, but makes a mistake when he thinks she'll face him honorably. With her tribe at his feet, Evo has to run for his life. Issue 6 follows Frostbite as the wars begin. Feeling guilty for the violence Threshold has inflicted, Leon agrees to lead his tribe to war. Meanwhile, Bliss's cult ambushes Powerhouse's people, taking down Hector with her power. Nicole reminds us that she's just as screwed up as her brother. While she can inflict emotions, she doesn't really feel them. Issue 7 focuses on Freestyle. Not originally a member of the team, she was introduced in later issues and drastically redesigned for this miniseries. Jocelyn is the one person not to play god or monster, but to actually accept the tribe as her equals. She uses her calculation powers to figure out ways to improve their lives, such as creating aqueducts, and she's noticed something's wrong with the twin sons. Meanwhile, we jump back to Evo to find that his ability to kill has impressed his pursuers enough that they will follow him over Rachel. While this is going on, Frostbite meets with Bliss and Threshold to try and avert this war, but of course the psycho Sibs aren't having it. Finally, inevitably, the war begins and people die.
War. War never changes.
Mr. Perlman? Ron?
In the midst of the battle, Powerhouse arrives, and we find out that Freestyle sent him to break up the fighting. She's realized what the problem was with the suns. It's that a third has appeared. Only it's not a sun, it's a meteor, and it's on a direct course to their planet. It's back in the present with Jem that we find out one of the deviants didn't make it home in one piece. Issue 8 brings us to the endgame. With the planet killer on its way, the DV8 team calls a truce and holds court as their tribes gather around them in the hopes that their gods can save them. Threshold snaps and tries to drive away the tribes, only to be faced with their faith in their gods. Jocelyn pushes her powers as hard as they can go in the hopes of finding some way to stop the comet, but it's all for naught. As the comet makes impact, Jocelyn dies from overtaxation due to her power, and a teleportation door from the carrier appears, allowing the deviants to escape. Back in the present, Jem is finally confronted by her questioners, Jackson King, leader of Stormwatch, and the Midnighter from the Authority. Turns out King knew the planet was going to die, and he dropped DV8 right on top of it. He tells Jem that he wants her team to help him protect the Earth, and having lost this world, they can now understand the stakes he fights for. Jem makes it clear she's tired of being manipulated, and that King's just the latest in a long line, but helping him is something the Deviants will think about on their ride home to Earth.
So that's DV8. Kind of a bummer. But honestly, its raw characterization and the way that it updates and honors a book that hadn't seen print in almost over a decade really won me over. I honestly think this is one of the best books that I read in 2010. So what works and what didn't?
Well, let's get the negatives out of the way. There are some questions that never get answered, like, was Jem some sort of control group? And when did this story take place? Well, in a comic book issues exclusive, I can answer that. Brian Wood answered an email I sent him on the subject and confirms that this story takes place prior to Number of the Beast, the event that reduced Wildstorm to an apocalypse setting. And there is a pretty big plot hole moment after the major battle where Powerhouse comes striding onto the field at Freestyle's behest, but when last we saw him, Bliss had taken him down. How did Freestyle get to him, or did he free himself? Again, not answered. And while Wood tries to be fair, with 8 issues to tell a story about 8 characters, a few are bound to get the short end. Frostbite and Freestyle are relegated to a generic, morally right stance and don't quite get the characterization the others do. The positives of this book are far more overwhelming. First off, the covers by Fiona Staples are gorgeous and give you nice insight into each character. And the interior art by Rebecca Isaacs are just as gorgeous as the covers. Rebecca Isaacs is the next Chris Sprouse, and that's not a comparison to be thrown out lightly. Like Chris, Rebecca rocks at portraying the world in a flat, two-dimensional way. Some artists love to get as lifelike as they can, but Rebecca makes the flat, quasi-animated style work for her. DC or Marvel needs to snatch her up and put her on a monthly right away. And Brian Wood's script is truly excellent and should be required reading for anyone attempting to relaunch a stale property. He does away with the previous alliances in the group and the convoluted histories, but never outright disavows that history. The characters claim to have amnesia, so basically they don't remember their past series, but it still could have happened for all we know. He brings up Gemma's multiple personalities from the old book, but does away with them as they would have held the character back. He honors the themes and history of the characters, but doesn't shy away from updating them so as to best serve the story. The story is also an update of an old cliché, the idea of how the world would react to superheroes if they really existed, but rather than set this in modern times, he uses the conceit of an alien planet, which is easier to swallow than time travel, I suppose, to set the time period into a prehistoric society. This puts DV8 in a position where they look down, pity, and even empathize with the people enough that they get caught up in their society. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the book's colorist, Carrie Strachan. From the vibrant colors of space to the more muted earth tones of the planet, this book is just beautifully colored.
Alright, I give DV8, Gods and Monsters, 4.5 stars out of 5. It would have been a perfect score, but like I said, there are a few flaws in the stories, and some of the characters didn't really get their due. If it had been 10 issues, well then, who knows? But still, it's a wonderful story that you can appreciate whether or not you've read the old book, and that is an accomplishment in and of itself. The trade paperback collection should be out sometime in April. Buy this book! And remember Wildstorm fondly, friends. I'm the Last Angry Geek. Thanks for watching.